Okay, we've got some participants coming in. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to get started here. My name is Stella Primo, and I'm the Executive Director of the Capital Region Family Business Center. The FBC is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that was started over a decade ago by family businesses interested in sharing resources and best practices for other family businesses. Our mission is to help the businesses in our region grow and prosper. This webinar is one of those examples of the way that we do that. This webinar is going to be recorded and will be on our website in the next couple of days. But for all of our attendees, I'm going to send you a personal link out by Friday with the video included. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for sharing your expertise this afternoon, and also to Kurt Rocca, who's been a longtime volunteer and member and essential person on our programs committee that's been helping us bring these programs to life. So Kurt, will you take it from here?
With pleasure. Stella, thank you. And as you said, thank you to the panelists. For those I don't know, Stella said, my name is Kurt Rocca. I'm with DCA Partners. We're a local investment banking firm, and also we manage a private equity fund. And so we get an opportunity to work with a lot of the region's top businesses, which is both an honor and a privilege, and also most days and most times a lot of fun. So as Stella mentioned, we're here today with Naz Alikan, Scott Powell, and Brian King, who each bring a varied perspective to the question of when we look beyond the horizon, what does the world look like? And I'm trying to come up with the right word. Everybody's talking about the new normal. I'm going to trademark, numal or something, so I can get paid every day. Someone uses some silly word to describe what the new normal is. So I'm trying to stay away from using those types of terms. But everybody is trying to. I think a lot of attention has been spent, especially over the last month or so, on the PPP program, and now just sort of all those aspects of getting through this. But the reality is, getting through it's only worthwhile if you can capitalize on what's on the other side. And so I think that's what we want to start. That's the dialogue we'd like to start today, is trying to get some perspective on what's likely to be this new paradigm that most of us are using to operate our businesses within. And obviously no one has our perfect crystal ball. And what you're going to hear today are the opinions of three very qualified and very smart individuals. But please keep in mind, it's just their opinions. There are no great crystal balls, and there's just too many variables going on right now for anybody to know definitively what the future is going to look like. And I think that's hopefully what makes this an interesting conversation. So before we jump into the conversation itself, maybe if I could have the panelists each just do a quick introduction, just your name, your position, the organization you're with, and what you're spending the majority of your time, the types of issues you're spending the majority of your time dealing with. Brian, yours is probably going to be self-evident, but the other people are going to be a little more difficult. So let me start with you.
You bet. Brian King, Chancellor for the four Los Rios colleges in the Capital Region: American River College, Cosumnes River, Folsom Lake, and Sac City. And Kurt, not much has gone on the last couple months.
That's true, I guess, in some ways. You don't even have students running around the campus. What an easy job all of a sudden.
My tongue's firmly in my cheek. It's hard to believe this is the 2-month anniversary of our decision to go to 100% remote operation. So it's been an incredibly busy and invigorating, and in some ways exciting time. Yeah. So that's top of mind, moving our instruction to online and our operations to remote. And then the other thing that keeps me awake at night is knowing the governor is going to release a revision to the state budget next year, and has talked about $54 billion in cuts. So that's going to be a massive impact on our state and on all state services.
Yeah, we'll get to that one in a bit. Scott, do you mind if you want to follow up that cheery bit of news?
Exactly. It's well, Kurt, thank you, and Stella, again, thank you for the invite to to participate in your panel today. My name is Scott Powell. I am the Senior Vice President for Business Development and Market Analytics for the Greater Sacramento Economic Council. So I lead our business development and research teams. And the Greater Sacramento Economic Council is the regional economic development group for the 6-county region within the Sacramento area. And as you can imagine, kind of like Brian, it's been pretty quiet. A lot of our focus has been really on what does the recovery look like, and what is the economy? How do we position this region as we start coming out of this recession? Because we are in the middle of a recession, and it's gonna last for how long, nobody knows. But putting a lot of our energy in that and making sure that the economy is resilient and we come out of this swiftly, and the region's well positioned for growth in the future.
Very good. Naz, you mind wrapping
Hi.
up the intros?
No, thanks, Kurt. My name is Naz Ali Khan, and I'm a principal at Williams & Patton Architects and Planners, and I'm an interior designer and space planner. What I've been doing through the last couple of months really is working on projects and trying to meet client deadlines. So it's business as usual, but business at home. And then just over the last week, really, we're intensely talking about getting back into the office safely and working on a game plan for how we do it. And right after this, I'm going to be jumping into a meeting where we're going to do some final decisions and look to see when we can get started. So that's very interesting and exciting as well.
Well, thanks to everybody for being part of this discussion. So I want to we're going to get granular here in a bit, but want to maybe kick things off with something that's a little bit more macro, and be interested in everybody's perspective on what one sort of long-term systemic change, one positive and one perhaps negative, that you think is likely to be a lasting effect of the current COVID-19 situation that we're all going through. Naz, you want to maybe start the discussion?
I am really surprised at the adaptability of people. When this thing started 2 months ago, we literally didn't have time to prepare to jump into a home office, but we did. And, the resiliency of people too, to go from one extreme to the other, technology to keep up with it and keep us continuing working. And really nobody complaining. We've just had a great crew that has jumped in, and we're seeing everybody we interact with is the same. So I really do hope the adaptability continues on, because it's important. And then the one thing that I'm hoping doesn't linger for too long is travel and restrictions on travel. And moving about not only the country, but the world, because I love to travel. I think it's so important for people, but the restrictions could stay for a little bit.
Okay, good thoughts. Brian, how about you? How about from your perspective?
One thing we've learned is that high touch and high tech are not necessarily opposite things, that overwhelmingly our services were provided in person. And we've learned in really a 72-hour period between Friday, March 13th and 3 business days later on March 18th, we went from 100% face-to-face essentially to 100% remote. And a lot of the feedback is that students prefer some of the services that have been converted remotely. If you wanted to see a counselor, you had to have an appointment and come to one of our colleges. Now you can do that remotely. So the time will come when the focus will be on face-to-face interactions. We have and will always be primarily a group of colleges in the Capital Region that provide face-to-face instruction. But I think we've seen that online instruction can work in areas we didn't think it would work, and remote services will continue in a substantial way to be provided that way, even after we have the ability to interact face-to-face again.
Yeah, good. Scott, how about you?
One thing I really hope that continues on with this is the emphasis on personal hygiene. I mean, since you were 8 years old, when has anybody reminded you this often? Wash your hands. But in all seriousness, really to go, with what the other panelists said, and what we're couching it for this region is digital transformation of both, online skill sets or skills people are going to need. Of everybody had to adapt their business model to be online. So we're fully expecting a digital transformation of the Greater Sacramento economy, both in workforce and in how businesses operate. And if that does take off and people embrace that and are resilient, I think you're going to see that change in the business model and our workforce, and for the better of the region.
So Scott, let's explore that a little bit. So I mean, that's a great buzzword, digital transformation, but when you drill down into it, what does that actually mean at the ground level?
Nobody knows what it means. That's what makes it fun to say.
But it's cool. It sounds really
exactly.
good.
It's a buzzword.
It's provocative. But no, digital transformation really is how do you transform, whether it's your business model, your skill set, or anything else, using, adapting the internet. I mean, for one example, and this is a personal, I've lived in areas, for 15 years where I could get my groceries online. First time I ever got my groceries delivered was a month and a half ago. And am I going to change how in which I, buy that stuff? Absolutely. So part of it is, we commissioned the Brookings report, being Sacramento was so slow to recover from the last recession. And some of the two big findings, if you read that report, which is available on our website, was the need for a greater amount of tradable sector jobs within the Sacramento economy and the need for more digital skills. Only about 10% of the people in the area possess the digital skills necessary to be in this new economy. As we come out of this coming recession, you're going to have those skills.
Yeah.
So we're looking at what do we need to do as a region to better upskill. And having a college or the 4 colleges that Brian leads, that offers a lot of those training of just how important it's going to be to take advantage of those, because it doesn't matter what job you're going to do, from manufacturing to customer service, you're going to have a digital competency and skill set. And absent that, you're going to be left behind. And if we're not careful, if we're not being thoughtful and inclusive of all of our citizens, we're going to see a greater amount of inequality coming out of this recession. So that's something, at the Greater Sacramento Economic Council, we're spending a lot of time and energy thinking about, and what can we do to make sure that as this economy recovers, that it recovers for everybody and not just for a very small subset.
So Brian, speaking of that inequality factor that Scott touched on, I know I've heard, a lot of discussion around that as it relates to education and these digital skills that people require, but also just access to the tools that people need when they can't just go and get, in-person instruction, whether that be tools to the right hardware or just access on the internet. Can you talk to that a little bit and how you see the educational system sort of stepping up to deal with that transformation?
It's a great point that the inequalities existed before the pandemic, but it really has shined a bright light on the fact that some people don't have the technology tools, they don't have the laptops, they don't have the iPads, they don't have the latest smartphone. And increasingly students do things on the phone that a lot of people the age of our panelists have trouble wrapping our brains around. So we worked really hard to help students get broadband access now that all of our classes are offered online. And Comcast, AT&T, some of the other providers have done a good job making their hotspots free. SMUD is working in that area, and Regional Transit has sent some buses to areas where there isn't broadband access so that people can tap in. But those are temporary solutions, and we really need a regional strategy to fill in the broadband deserts. It's just a basic necessity now to have broadband access at home in the modern economy. In terms of hardware, each of our colleges in an amazingly short time distributed hundreds of laptop computers to students and also hotspots. So a recognition that having the hardware in the hands of students quickly is essential. And then also dealing with connectivity issues. Another part of what we call our digital equity strategy, that we have a group working on long-term issues to make sure that students have remote access. And even if you have a computer and broadband access, the reality, not just for our students, but for a lot of employees in all of our organizations, is that their homes are not always an ideal work environment for a lot of reasons. When a lot of my colleagues have little kids, and you see people in homes now with just a lot of pressure to be working remotely. So recognizing all of those challenges, and some of those we won't be able to address well until we have computer labs open, but it's not clear how soon we're going to be able to do that safely. Scott, I saw a smile like you might have little ones around.
Yeah, it was funny is when you said that, I talked to my daughter before the started of, honey, do you have I have an 11-year-old little girl who's homeschooling. Like, do you have a lesson from 2 to 3 or do you have to be online? No, I'm like, can you stay off because dad's got to be on a webinar? But I just kind of wanted to piggyback something that we've been kind of looking at our office of after the Great Depression, reading and writing and providing basic utilities, water, water and electricity was how this country grew and expanded after the Great Depression. After this recession, it's going to be about digital. It's going to be digital skills and access to digital. I 100% agree with what Dr. King just said.
So given that, Brian, how are you, and you maybe haven't even had time to think about this yet, but adapting not only how you teach, but what you teach and what conversations are happening within the higher education world about both of those subjects and the skills that you need to prepare people for coming out of this relative to what you were preparing them for before. Has that conversation evolved yet, or is that still to come?
It's a very robust discussion, and we've talked about students and their needs in terms of broadband and hardware. But the truth is, a lot of faculty through the whole educational ecosystem never thought that they would be teaching online or remotely, and many vehemently did not want to. So part of the recognition has been that there's not a choice, as we've made the decision through the fall now to be primarily online. There are some courses that are much more difficult to convert to an online or remote modality. Our nursing clinicals are a great example. We have a wonderful partnership with Dignity Health, where they have reopened our clinical opportunities so that our second and third semester nurses can continue moving forward. And our fourth semester nurses will be able to graduate both at American River College and Sac City. So nobody really wants someone to learn how to be a phlebotomist remotely. There are some things still tough to do remotely. So we're spending a lot of time on the areas that are difficult but not impossible to convert. So biology and science labs, physics labs, very hard for faculty to imagine that using YouTube videos and other tools could even remotely approximate the in-person experience. And part of the conversation is that may be true, that the online experience is frequently not the optimal experience compared to being in person. But for the short term, it's the only way to provide that instruction. And I wouldn't be surprised if we'll find that many people who thought things were impossible actually find out that they're not only doable, but they work fairly well. And we mentioned early on, none of us have crystal balls, but I imagine we'll have quite a few faculty who thought they never wanted to teach online, that after this experience, we'll see some advantages. So I think our online inventory over the long haul will continue to grow.
To that point, do you see the world changing in terms of what your recruiting, platform looks like, in terms of actually having faculty members now that are spread out over a much broader geographic region, not needing to be here remotely? Or do you think it'll settle back down where your professors are still local?
I think there will be some of both, that our long-term faculty will in some cases return to something very much like what the world was like before the pandemic. But I think even for faculty members who are understandably eager to get back to face-to-face instruction, they've learned to use some tools that will benefit students even in the face-to-face environment. That many of our instructors are recording their lectures through Zoom, and so many of our students have job requirements and are taking care of their own children or a parent. So the opportunity to be able to attend a class remotely, even when we return to a face-to-face environment, I think has been an epiphany for many of our faculty, that serving our students involves recognizing that sometimes it's tough for them physically to get on campus. And another group of students that we simply have not been able to serve because their lives do not allow them to come on campus, I think we'll see that in bridging some of the equity challenges in our community, having a more robust degree program, so a series of degree programs online from a public institution is really exciting for our community.
No, that's a great point. That's a great point. I hadn't really come to appreciate that people now, really can get a college education within the convenience of working around all their other competing priorities. So how about what's the feedback been from the students thus far? I mean, are they, you hear about certainly the private school students at the college level complaining about the ridiculous amounts of money that they were paying for their education, which they're now, feeling like they got shortchanged on. But at the community college level specifically, what's the feedback been?
Well, I think it's like everything else. It's not monolithic as far as how students are reacting. That part of it depended on the tools that they had before the pandemic hit. And if you were comfortable in a digital environment, the transition is easier. Our biggest concern is our students who are vulnerable, and our students of color, and our disproportionately impacted students. So the issues like broadband connectivity are a major concern, and having the tools that they need to complete their studies online. But I think our students in many ways are resilient, and our summer enrollment has already opened, and we're running about 50% above enrollment for the same time last year. So I think that's one indicator that there was a pent-up demand for a broader inventory of online courses. And for the short term, maybe even the midterm, concerns about safety are really going to make a remote method of instruction appealing for students for more than just the fall semester, if I have to predict.
How about the younger kids, at the elementary and through the high school ages? How do you see their world being different, a year from now relative to, maybe the elementary school experience that you and I had?
Well, I don't pretend to be an elementary expert. I'm the son of a first grade teacher, so that's my expertise as far as K-12, and the worlds are very different. And particularly with younger children, that in-person interaction and learning how to read, there are limits to technology. On the other hand, we all understand that the younger generation that has been around technology their whole lives, in some ways, are able to adapt to that technology. So I think in K-12, it's not that different than in higher education, that it's, in addition to helping the students be successful in an online environment, much more in-depth training is needed for faculty. That before the pandemic, for the Los Rios colleges, about 20% of our offerings were already online. So we had a significant number of faculty who had engaged deeply in training for online education. And for K-12, that is very unusual. I know Scott's wife works in an online environment in the K-12 world in high school. So you have some instances like that in high school, but very little remote instruction has happened in the K-12 world up to this point. And the rest of our higher education partners, the California State University system had essentially no online classes before the pandemic, nor did the University of California. So the lift for our sister institutions really has been greater than it was for community colleges, because we were already in the online space. And before the pandemic, the Los Rios colleges were far and away the largest provider of online education in the public sector. And I think that will likely continue and grow in the years to come.
So I know that you all have decided to hold your courses only online in the fall semester. The state schools have agreed to do, or, decided to do the same. Can you share with us what was behind that decision? What is the grand concern about reconvening, and what do you think the catalyst is likely to be when people get comfortable to actually have in-class or in-person classes again?
The pendulum swings very swiftly in this environment. So if you would go back maybe 3 weeks ago, we had a strong push from many of our faculty leaders to plan for a fall semester that would be on ground. I think very understandably that they recognize the importance of students coming together. But I think there was a sea change, not just at our colleges, but across the state, as people began to understand how difficult reopening was going to be in the short term. And the safety of our students, faculty, and staff is always paramount. And I think more and more of our employees were recognizing that it was going to be very difficult with an organization our size. When you're talking about 70,000 students and thousands of employees, you can't screen every person before they go into every class. You can't clean every classroom before the next group comes. And with social distancing almost certainly to be required at the state level in the fall, if you have a lecture class that is accommodates 40 students in a traditional setting, if you have people 6 feet apart, you're down to 6 or 7 people in a class. And then the economics of it simply don't work, that having enough faculty to teach classes that small. And again, I don't mean to be a downer, but just a pragmatist, we know that what's happened to the economy, the state budget is going to be reduced, not increased. So some of the ways that you could provide in-person instruction are prohibitively expensive, and the safety concerns of faculty, staff, and students is the #1 driver towards getting a little more runway before reopening at our colleges.
Right. Just so we don't end on a downer note, what is, you know, as you look 5 years out and you think about higher education and how it's delivered and the impact it has on young people's, well, on everybody's life, not just young people, you know, what do you get excited about? What do you think that the real opportunity is to evolve higher education, that we're going to look back on this time and say, you know what, that probably accelerated that by, 10 years, 20 years, whatever the time frame is? What gets you fired up?
I think there's a lot to be optimistic about, and change is hard always, but when things are going fairly well, we have a long list of things we could do in our organizations that would make things better. But if things are fundamentally going along okay, it's hard to summon the courage to change because it makes all of us uncomfortable. So just going back to what's happened in the last 2 months since March 13th, the 2-month anniversary of our decision to go remote, we have done more in 60 days as far as fundamental structural change of our organization than we had probably done in the previous 20 years. So I think there's great value in recognizing that we can move more quickly than we thought we could when it's for the good of our students, faculty, and staff. I think that's a muscle that we want to continue to develop, that we can make decisions quickly and also do it collaboratively. And back to Scott's point about the importance of digital skills, we've had a crash course throughout our entire organization about how technology can be used in a better way and in a way that improves outcomes for students. So I think moving forward, there will be efficiencies that we have learned that are really going to change things. So Naz is the architect on the call, but I really see a fundamental change in the architecture of higher education coming out of COVID-19. That the world that we knew back in February and March, we're not going to return to that world. There will be losses that are unfortunate, but also a lot of gains and improvements that I think are exciting.
So Naz, let's shift things over to you. I think most of us are wondering, and whether we're on the the owner side, trying to figure out what we need to do in order to make our work environments not only safe but productive for our employees, or on the employee side saying, gee, what should I be worried about? How should my behaviors adapt once I go back to the office? Can you share with us what you're hearing and what your view of how office life is likely to change post-COVID?
Yeah, definitely. And before I do that, I wanted to say, Brian, that end point was really great, because education is slow to change. And I think that just hearing you say that you've made so many changes and so many strides, I think that's a really refreshing and exciting thing to look forward to in the future. And I think that this whole work from home has been an interesting change even in the workplace. And you had asked the question, what is the most impactful change that's going to come to the workplace? And I really think it's work from home. And I, just as a check, actually sent out an email to all the people at the office, and I asked them, not telling them how I felt about it, but everyone who responded felt the same way. So it's been sort of the kind of change that people have wanted. I think that the Gen Y, the millennial generation, that is really the dominant number now in the workforce. We've been getting requests over time, and I think that once we were forced to do this, I don't know that we can ever, put that back in the basket. I mean, it's going to be there forever. So really adapting, and what we're looking at right now is this is a huge time of transition, right? We really can't predict the future. We don't know what's going to even happen in the fall. It could be that we slide back to something like this, or, things could move forward. So what's happening right now, and from everybody that I'm talking to, people are making plans to get back into the workplace, looking at safety, looking at flexibility for their staff and employees, understanding that nobody really has the same circumstances, and then looking to see what they can implement without a lot of cost. Because I think people really feel like, we're going to do something and then something's going to change, and something may not be permanent. And so, we're looking at the lowest cost denominator pretty much on what's going to happen. So what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing a lot of is people wanting to bring people back into the office, but not 100% of the staff all in there at one time. So there will definitely be a thinning of people, just so that they can keep the space open, and it doesn't feel like you're all of a sudden everybody's clasped together and we could be open for something negative. So that's definitely something that we see. Yeah.
Sorry, Naz, I didn't mean to interrupt, but do you see that as being a transitional phase that, while we're working our way through this, that happens? Or do you see that as what the world from here to forever is going to look like?
No, I think it's definitely going to be a transitional phase, and it's going to start now. When it's going to stop, we don't know. And I think that that's why there's a reluctance to invest a lot of money into what is going to happen, but yet people are looking at what's going to provide the most safety for staff when they come in.
Do you think that ultimately, like a lot of things, one of the things that amazes me is how short our memories seem to be on all these things that we went through, whether it was the last, Great Recession or whatever. It's lessons we thought we were going to learn, and changes that we were going to own and adapt and keep with us forever. All of a sudden, as soon as we could go back to normal, we seem to revert back to normal. Sounds like you're feeling like that's likely to be the case, that what our offices looked like back in January, or how we behaved with one another in the office environment, it sounds like it's your view that some period of time down the road, you think we're going to revert back to that similar type of environment and behavior. Is that?
It's a possibility, right? You can look at it two different ways. One is that there could be that reverting back to that behavior, or the other could be that there are so many substantial changes that could be made to move things forward that it will affect our behavior down the road. And I really do believe that the work from home is going to be in our lives and in our work lives moving down the road. So how that's going to change the footprint of the workplace, what it means to be in a workplace, and how often people will be there is going to be impacted.
So you mentioned that right now you're spending a huge part of your time just working through projects that were already in motion before all this.
Yeah.
So for those people, they started like a lot of us. We all did most of us did our business plan right at the end of last year, and we got 3 months into it and said, well, throw that thing away. And I got to believe, people who are doing space planning, there was a big part of that same dynamic. What changes, if any, are those people who set up their plan for their space plan for their office, thinking their world was going to look one way, and now realizing it may look different? What changes are they making to those plans?
So I think the majority of changes are how close desks are together and how far apart they are. So we're really watching the spacing around the work surfaces and workstations themselves. I really think the other thing that's going to impact is the high touch areas and, what people actually are in contact with. And so moving forward, we need to look at a lot of touchless items, touchless faucets. I read somewhere that people could be using like an Alexa to turn on a TV or to operate their audiovisual system or whatever. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at as well. I'm working on a clubhouse right now, and there's showers and there's a sauna in there, and we're doing seam-free finishes in there, so that that's another, it evokes cleanliness. And one of the interesting things we came across too was, by code, you have to put water fountains in buildings, right? And the client was like, "Come on, we can't do this. We want bottle fillers, or we want something instead of water fountains." But that's a part of code, so you have to put that in there. So, ultimately there could be some code changes as well based on really all the new hygiene and cleanliness and people's awareness of their surroundings in that way.
So when we go back, I mean, I'm thinking about our own office, right? And you have the copy machine, right?
Yeah.
That has buttons that are, you have the microwave, you have the water, dispenser, like you said, the faucet, the refrigerator. How are all those common use spaces and devices going to evolve? And what's your advice to people on how to maintain productivity while still maintaining safety?
Yeah, so, as far as those items that you talk about, I mean, it's like, we just talked about it too, is have a lot of Clorox wipes nearby to use them. We've been finding that really printing isn't such a big deal anymore, and really the copier, so it's not used as much as it used to be. We can look at everything on the computer. We can look at drawings and models and all kinds of stuff, and we're noticing that the younger generation doesn't print as much as we boomers used to print. So I think that, that's something that is on the decrease anyway. But really, I do see a lot of this no-touch technology coming in. For the time being, I think we have to make do with what the easiest and cleanliest solution is, which could be literally, like I said, use a napkin or and wash your hands all the time. But I do see technologies developing down the road where you actually don't need to touch anything, that they're voice activated.
So given
what I'm hearing is buy stock in the Kohler for their touch-free faucets.
Yeah, exactly. And in commercial facilities, we've been pushing touch-free faucets for a really long time. And so this clubhouse I'm working on, they are doing that anyway. But that sort of has been in the works for a while. We've got work surfaces that are antimicrobial. So, I see more of the use of those kinds of things in kitchens and break rooms and places like that.
Yeah, that's great. So you mentioned like working from home, and you mentioned safety. So if I were designing a new office today, what would your advice to me be in terms of how I needed to set my office up ideally for the work environment of the future? If you were looking I'm just about ready to sign a 10-year lease. So I have to anticipate what the world is going. Trust me, I'm not. But if I were, and I had to plan my space to be able to accommodate all the evolutions that are likely to take place, how should I be thinking about it, and how should I be laying out my space?
Yeah, I would say be as flexible as you can in your space layout, which means when you're buying furniture, make sure that it's movable, reconfigurable, because those things are going to be important. The majority of people sit at workstations right now. They don't sit in offices. So that's really good, because workstations do provide you the flexibility to do that. Furniture manufacturers are coming out with like plexiglass screens and so on that separate each workstation. So that's very helpful. And so those are the things from a furniture level that you could do. And I would say the one thing that still is going to be evolving over time is really how people meet in spaces. You know, the big conference rooms with the big comfy chairs that you're all squished together in a place, that's not going to happen for a long, long time. And really the research is showing that where people are most comfortable is meeting in an open space. So really designing spaces that are multifunctional, flexible, and people can go there and meet, maybe meet in the open, not in small rooms where people can gather and, you know, the spacing around them is questionable. I think that's a really important thing, because I think over time, the two areas that are going to evolve the most are conference rooms and meeting rooms and break rooms too, you know. So be as flexible as you can, especially if you're signing a 10-year lease.
Good advice in any circumstances.
Yeah.
So Scott, I want to shift over to you and bring it a little bit, closer to home. And as you said, I know you spend all your time thinking about Sacramento and the things that make Sacramento unique, and trying to, dive in not only to the people and the infrastructure, but the data around Sacramento. What are some of the things, other than the digital transformation, what are some of the things that you think are going to be long-term systemic impacts here in our region?
So, I mean, some of the long-term, I think it's one of those of human nature is we like to be around each other. And we need those interactions and those collisions. I mean, I remember when the fax machine came out, my dad was transitioning from the Air Force to the airlines, and everybody thought it was the end of the airlines. Why would he go fly for the airlines? The fax machine was going to kill him because you didn't need to travel anymore. In reality, it made business easier to do. When email came out, we weren't going to mail anything. So I think you're going to see a lot of people starting to, once a therapy or a vaccine, or once we find some way to, to solve for this. I mean, if you look back 100 years ago during the last pandemic that killed, far more people during its run, we returned back to normal fairly quickly in wanting to be around people. If you look at how we interact, how we worship, the most productive companies in the world rely on human collision and those spontaneous interactions for those next new great ideas. And we still need that as a human race, and I'm fully convinced of that. So I fully agree there's going to be a lot of changes. And again, I am all for those, those health changes. I like staying healthy and safe. And I think that'll matter more for flus and other types of, contagions that are less life-threatening. But I think long-term, we'll get back to back to what we are as human beings. We didn't create these big dense cities on accident. We did it very deliberately. We don't create these big gathering places on accident. We do it on purpose because that's what people want. And I think everybody's craving that interaction when they can get back to that again. So whenever that is, and the biggest caveat is how do we solve for that? Is it a vaccine? Is it a therapy? Is it herd immunity? Is it something that a scientist, could educate you that I can't? I think once that's done, that's where things will start edging back. But I agree. I think the short-term and office space, I think the good news is if your lease is up in the next couple of years, you're going to have a lot of different options. The good news for the region is we didn't overbuild an office space. If this was 6 months ago, I'd tell you that's a major constraint to the growth of our economy. I think now it's going to actually position us pretty well of well-utilized office buildings. I think for Naz's firm, these are going to be great opportunities for tenant improvements. On the industrial side, I think we have some great opportunities if we're seeing a lot of industrial space coming online. Our vacancy rate pre-recession was 3%. We were talking to a lot of really cool, innovative startups that couldn't find space because none of it was available. So I think we're going to be positioned well in a region from a real estate perspective to take advantage of that long term. I think the hard part is just that uncertainty of when what that will be. But long term, again, I'm bullish on the economy, but that's also my job.
I want to follow up on that in just a second, but I think, Stella, can I kick it over to you for a second? I think you wanted to, we want to make sure we allow a little bit of time for people to ask questions. And I think you had some instructions for them on how to actually submit their questions for the panel. Do you not? There you are, you're back.
Hi. Yes, we have the Q&A function available below if anybody wants to ask a general question to all of our panelists or to any one panelist specifically. And we don't have any there just yet. But
That's great. I want to make sure that we got people. I still have to pick on Scott a little bit more, but I just wanted to make sure we got the instructions there so that when we got to there and got there in 5 minutes or so, that if there were questions that were on people's minds, that we would make sure we still had time to address them.
Awesome.
Okay, yep. So just type them in there in the Q&A section on the bottom of your screen, and we will circle back and try to make sure and touch all the ones that we have time for. So Scott, following up on that, you talked about gathering spots, and you can't help in this region when you hear things like gathering spots to think about that beautiful new MLS stadium that we've all been salivating over for some time. Of course, the Kings Arena downtown. I think of all the businesses that were built down, in the Doco area, all surrounded, all designed to capitalize on the fact that we had a catalyst to draw people together, as you said. Tell me what you see happening down there. I mean, how do those people survive, and then how does that region evolve over time in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, and it kind of, if you've read Jim Collins and kind of the Stockdale paradox is kind of what I think of, you've got to be extremely optimistic, but, you can't ignore, you've got to confront the reality head on. And the reality is it's going to be difficult for, again, until some solution, again, a vaccine or a therapy or some other solution comes up, it's going to be tough. I think when the office space start reopening and people can start populating down there, they'll see a tick up. But I think those social gathering places are going to put a huge emphasis, whether they've got 2,000 or 20,000 or two, of how do they provide safety in the short term. And the great thing of coming out of this is, it's about resiliency. I mean, Brian was talking about how resilient and adaptable his university or college was to come up with solutions that probably would have taken him normally 18 months to 2 years to do this amount of digitization. He did it in 3 days. So I think for businesses that can look at that, I mean, a great business owner by definition is a problem solver. They understand risk, they understand how to mitigate, and they understand how to devise a good or service to a business. They don't need somebody to tell them how to do that. The good ones figure it out and excel that way. So you're going to see the most talented businesses coming up with those type of solutions to how do I evolve in, again, a new digital landscape? How do I provide my good service or product, to my end user? And how do I become more resilient and thoughtful in that delivery system? Yeah. So those companies that figure that out, I think are going to be with us a long time, and we're going to see a great amount of innovation, which will only benefit those companies in the long run.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, just the innovation that's come out of some of the restaurateurs to figure out how to adapt their business overnight. I mean, it's amazing what happens when status quo isn't an option. I mean, it's just completely off the table. So change is mandated. It's just a matter of which change are you going to make. And all of a sudden that changes the whole conversation. And it's been really interesting to see how those people have adapted. So what's your view on, let's just say going to a Kings game? I mean, let's just focus on that one. Going to a Kings game in 2021. What does that look like?
Well, hopefully a playoff version of a Kings team.
Let's go with that.
Yeah, and so a young, dynamic, fast-moving team that is able to keep up with the Lakers. But I think again, you're going to see a lot of those requirements. Social distancing. You're probably going to see some amount of restrictions. And again, nobody wants to. I think another reason a lot of these businesses are going to be very, very cautious is the liability side of it. The Kings, need to come up with a solution to prove they did everything possible to keep their patrons safe. Not only because it's good business practice and they want to do it, I think legally their insurance and ownership is going to mandate it of them. So, I think once again, we figure out that therapies, I think if anything, people are going to be piling into that stadium because they are going to be missing and craving, that close, congenial sports environment to, cheer on a hometown favorite. But I think in the short term, if you're looking at what the NFL and Major League Baseball, it might be if we're watching these things on TVs, or at a very, very reduced footprint. So I'm curious to see how they're going to solve it as well. I'll be as many games. I mean, I moved here in August, and I think I went to 5 games before the lockdown, and I was going to go, I think, 2 weeks, after this all happened. I still had tickets for the 31st. So it's tough to tell. I would love to hear. I guarantee you they're all thinking about that, but I think it's really going to depend on that environment on the ground, because again, they want to deliver. They're one of the most technologically advanced arenas in the country, and they built it that way. So you might have a much more digital experience, than you currently do to interact with, with the sport and everything that's going on. And again, I think long-term sports leagues are highly adaptable of giving consumers what they want. And so I think long-term, I think both those franchises are going to be more successful because of the thought they put into it when they built or building those arenas. So don't know if it'll be a lot of fun that first year once they figure it out, but I think once they do, I'm really excited to see what they come up with, given the thought they put into the stadium when they built it in 06.
So kind of pivoting off of that, my sense from that comment is that your sense is there shouldn't be any real meaningful delay to the Major League Soccer program.
I mean, I believe soccer starts, it's a summer sport in this country. So 2022, every indication we have, they're still moving forward. My hope is by the time the first MLS season rolls out in Sacramento, that we've got some solution to this problem.
So you spend your entire, waking professional life trying to sell Sacramento and, convince people that Sacramento is the better place for them to locate their business than wherever they are now. How does your pitch evolve kind of on the back end of this relative to what it looked like coming in?
Yeah, it's funny. That's actually something we're talking about, and we're talking about it again at 4:00 today, of how do we evolve and change that value proposition, to meet that current reality. And the hard part is that current reality of what companies are doing is still being baked. You had Twitter and, as Brian mentioned, JP Morgan basically telling everybody to stay at home. So, what does that look like as we're marketing the region? We truly believe we are the best California option, that we're that right mix of the most innovative economy in the world, that's still affordable and accessible to, most businesses and people. With proximity to recreation, we provide, I think, an unparalleled, employee experience for companies where they're looking to come in. And I think we've got that right mix of density. As people are going to want some social distancing for the next few years, we're dense, but we're not too dense. So you can get that, that great big city feel, but you can keep your, your 6-foot bubble, and still interact and have cool and exciting places to go and amenities to be around. So I think actually the Sacramento area is going to be very well positioned of, kind of in that Goldilocks area of just right. That we're betting a lot of companies are looking for.
Yeah, very good. Stella, I do want to ask before we do run out of time if there are any questions from the audience. If not, I have plenty more, but I just wanted to make sure we allocated some time for others.
We have one, and it's: do you believe companies will have a difficult time enforcing the social distancing or the cleanliness rules when they get back to work?
Naz, I think no one is probably qualified to answer that question in a professional level, and we probably all have an opinion.
Yeah.
Scott, looks like you want to chime in. So
yeah, what's funny is I was eating lunch, I saw an article of a 7-Eleven clerk, I believe it was Indiana, told some people to separate, and the clerk got assaulted. So it was, kind of a sad story, which was why I was chuckling, not in a good way, but it's going to be tough. I mean, there's not going to be the level of enforcement. You're not going to have police officers, would be my guess, walking in and telling people to keep distance. It's more of a code thing, and it's going to be up to a business owner to really kind of evaluate of how do I do that to also maintain a good level of customer service and safety for my patrons, both that individual, that's not respecting it and those that want it. So I don't envy the business owner. I think it's going to be a fine line to walk of, how do you maintain that? But I'll be honest, I don't know what 6 feet from somebody looks like. So I try to maintain my distance. I think most people, but 90% of the people want to do the right thing. I try, you go to the grocery store or anywhere else, I try to keep as much distance as possible, but recognizing it's not always possible. So I think if people move swiftly and keep moving, your risks are minimized with masks as well. I think there's ways to solve for it, but that, again, that's my uneducated opinion of a non-business owner who just is trying to use a little bit of common sense in his own life.
I think that's
Yep.
probably as educated as any of us. Not
Yeah, I was going to say in the workplace, it's really a lot of the checklists are saying keep things like hand sanitizer very visible. So anything that has anything to do with cleanliness and hygiene should be visible. If you need to put up signs, you should put up signs. So a lot of it is subliminal. I think where it gets to be a definite reaching out is if you do see somebody who's constantly evading that circle, but also people who are sick. I mean, it's one of those things where you do have a lot of people come into the office who are coughing or who you feel aren't 100% well when they come in. And that's going to be the one thing I think that a lot of business owners, if not all, in the workplace are going to be taking a look at and really asking people to leave if they're not feeling well.
Yeah, that's good. Really good point. So I'm going to ask one final closing question for everybody. And I just love to hear one anecdote of something that you've done during this pandemic lockdown, or a habit that you've adopted that you hope will be a long-term systemic change. Brian, we started with you earlier. You want to lay out yours first?
I think there are pros and cons to the meeting technology we're using now, but I think at its best, we found that we can get 35 leaders together for half an hour without having transportation issues. We used to think it took months to get together all of our senior leadership team. And now I think that'll be part of the cadence of meetings for a long time to come. So I think that's very positive.
Yeah, good. Naz?
Yeah, I would agree. The use of technology in all kinds of different formats has become a way of life in the last few months. And we're much more confident now that it works, and it actually, no productivity is lost in the workplace, and that we can work from anywhere. So I think that's a really positive thing. And I think that it really creates flexibility in somebody's work life. So I really hope that that stays and it enhances, and that's not a backslider.
Good. Scott, how about you?
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, on a personal level, it definitely wasn't diet and exercise. But I mean, I agree. I think honestly, adding, the comfort and the technology has proven that you can interact in a meaningful way, through, a Zoom or other type of format. For us, as we're reaching out to, people, I mean, we had somebody out of the office at least, 2 to 3 weeks, every month. And, knowing that we have this ability is going to make us far more efficient in how we deliver our services to the community. And we see it as going to be a good tool in our arsenal of how do we engage people throughout the country where, being there face-to-face wasn't an option. But
No.
I think those face-to-face meetings in the future are going to become more valuable, and another way in which to tell a client or, customer or supplier how valuable you are that you're making and willing to travel to see them.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that we haven't even talked about at all is one of the positive attributes is potentially a reduction in the traffic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, everybody's right, and we're going to fewer meetings, and we're working, from home more frequently. I got to believe there's some positive attributes to the traffic patterns running around town. One of the other things that really excites me, and this touches on something that all of you have mentioned, is just the change in people's sense of what's possible and also what a real challenge looks like. Because if you think about what has come at a lot of the different businesses and what they've had to deal with, to Brian, to your point, so quickly, and with all these, with all this long-standing history of, no, we can't do that. No, people can't work remote. No, we can't get your 35 people together. No, we can't do, these classes. It's like, well, when you don't have an option that's other than that, you figure out how to do it, right? And I think it'll be very interesting to see how many people for the next few decades look back at this time and say, let me tell you a story. You think this is going to be tough? Let me tell you a story. This is easy, guys. And it'll be interesting to see how much that change of paradigm of what is possible continues to accelerate the rate of change in a very positive way. So that's not that anybody asked, but that's mine. And I really hope that will be a long-standing impact of what we're going through right now. Stella, I think we're out of time.
I was going to ask you that question, so I'm really glad that you saved the time by just answering the question. So thank you for that. And I just want to echo what Naz had said earlier in the program is just how incredibly adaptive we are and quickly. And I think that we should be really proud of all of the pivoting, all of the adjustments that we've had to make, and also people's attitudes and jumping in, the willingness to want to make these huge changes in short amount of times. And so I'm really grateful for every one of you on this panel that are doing the work and are paving the way for all of this productivity and all of this change for us. As I mentioned before, the webinar is being recorded. For all of our participants today, I'm going to send you a personal email and link with this broadcast so you can watch it over and over again and forward it to all your friends. And that should be out hopefully by Friday. And then we'll also have this webinar on the website. Our June schedule, I'll be ready to publish that early next week. And thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in, and wash them hands and try not to touch your face.
Good. Thank you, Stella. Thanks to all the
Thanks.
panelists. Appreciate you
Thank you very
being
much
here.
for having us.
All right.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.